The smell of ozone and expensive espresso is a scent of power, but today it smells like a funeral. I can feel the vibration of the server room through the soles of my Italian leather heels, a low-frequency hum that mirrors the drumming in my chest. They think I'm the victim. They think I'm the grieving wife of a titan about to fall. They have no idea that I am the one who pulled the pin on the grenade and handed it to a stranger. I just have to look surprised when it goes off. I need this to burn perfectly. The office of Sterling and Associates sat 40 floors above the city, a fortress of floor-to-ceiling glass and polished chrome. Elena stood by the window, watching the rain streak the pane like tears on a cold face. Behind her, the silence was heavy. Her husband, Julian, was shouting into a speakerphone in the adjacent room, his voice a jagged edge of panic. I don't care what the IT logs say, Howard. The encryption shouldn't have been crackable. Julian slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. Elena didn't flinch. She adjusted her watch. A Cartier tank, a gift from Julian for their 5th anniversary. It was a beautiful shackle. She had spent a decade building his reputation, fixing his messes, and drafting the very prenuptial agreement that now threatened to leave her with nothing but a used car and a handshake. He was planning to serve her papers on Friday. It was Wednesday. The door clicked open. Julian walked in, his face a mottled gray. He looked aged, stripped of the arrogance that usually served as his armor. Someone leaked the offshore ledgers, everything, the Caymans, the shell companies, the inflated valuations. It's all out. Elena turned, her face a mask of practiced horror. Who? How is that possible? I can taste the copper of my own lie, and it tastes like victory. The firm's security head, a man named Miller who smelled of stale cigarettes in desperation, paced the hallway. He beckoned Elena and Julian into the monitoring room. On the screen, a grainy feed showed the server room from 36 hours prior. A man in a wrinkled navy polo shirt was hunched over a terminal. He looked nervous, his hand trembling as he inserted a black USB drive. He kept looking at the ceiling, right at the camera lens, as if he wanted to be caught. Marcus Thorne, Miller said, pointing a meaty finger at the screen. Junior IT support. Been with us 3 years. Quiet kid. No priors, but he's been vocal on internal forums about corporate ethics. We found the drive in his locker this morning. He didn't even try to hide it. Elena stepped closer to the monitor, her eyes narrowing. She memorized the sweat on Marcus's upper lip. He was perfect. He was a man with a moral compass that pointed exactly where she had pushed it. She had spent months dropping breadcrumbs for him. Anonymous emails, misplaced documents in the communal printer tray, whispers of Julian's corruption. Marcus thought he was a hero. Why would he do this to us? Elena asked, her voice trembling slightly. Because he's a loser who wants to feel important. Julian spat. I want him buried. I want every lawyer in this city to ensure he never sees the sun again. The sound of heavy boots on the marble lobby floor echoed like gunfire. The FBI didn't knock. They arrived with the weight of the federal government. Elena stood in the center of the living room of their penthouse as agents swarmed, tagging their art, boxing their files, and stripping the life she had curated. Julian was in handcuffs. The metallic snick of the ratchets was the most satisfying sound Elena had ever heard. He looked at her, pleading, expecting her to use her legal brilliance to make the agents vanish. Elena, called Ben. Tell him to get the judge on the phone. Julian yelled as he was led toward the elevator. I'll handle everything, Julian, she said, her voice soft and steady. An agent, a woman with a sharp bob and a badge clipped to her belt, approached Elena. Mrs. Sterling, we have a warrant for your personal devices as well. We understand you may be a victim of your husband's financial crimes, but we have to be thorough. Elena handed over a phone with a graceful, resigned nod. It was clean. She had used a burner for every interaction with the digital trail that led to Marcus. She watched the elevator doors close on Julian. The house is falling, and I am the only one who knows where fire exits are. The press was a pack of wolves outside courthouse. The flashbulbs were blinding, a strobe light of public humiliation. Elena walked down the steps, her head held high, her black coat buttoned to the chin. She looked like a widow, though her husband was still breathing. Across the street, she saw him. Marcus Thorne was being let out of a different vehicle, surrounded by his own set of agents. He looked small. The crowd jeered at him, calling him a traitor to the firm. He looked lost, searching the faces of the source who had promised him protection, promised him that the truth would set everyone free. His eyes met hers for a split second. Elena didn't look away. She didn't offer a smirk or a sign. She offered a look of pure, cold disappointment. She watched him realize that there was no one coming to save him. He had been the whistleblower. And in this city, whistleblowers were just targets that stood still. The scandal was already trending. The sterling fall. Her name was dragged to the mud by association. Her reputation as a top-tier attorney shattered. It was the price of admission. To stay the wife, she had to lose the career. To keep the money, she had to lose the man. 6 months later, the dust had settled into a thick layer of permanent grime. Julian was in a federal penitentiary, facing 20 years. The firm was liquidated. Elena lived in a modest, by her standards, apartment in a different part of the city. The seized assets were only the ones they knew about. The offshore accounts she had protected by framing Marcus remained untouched, waiting for the heat to die down. She sat at her kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating a private investigator's report. Marcus Thorne had been sentenced to 5 years, but he had been released early on compassionate grounds. The report included a photo. He was unrecognizable. He was skeletal, living in a halfway house, diagnosed with aggressive stage 4 lung cancer. The world saw him as the man who ruined the great Julian Sterling. They saw him as a disgruntled employee who destroyed a marriage and a legacy. Elena picked up her pen and traced the outline of Marcus's face in the photo. He was the only person left who had seen the files. He was the only person who could ever link the anonymous tips to her. He was a dying man with nothing to lose, and that made him the most dangerous variable in her equation. She needed to bring him close. She needed to be the only hand that fed him. I need to finish what I started. The air in this neighborhood tastes like wet ash and neglected ambition. I step over a discarded needle cap, my silk-lined coat pulled tight against the wind that howls between these crumbling tenements. My heart is a steady, rhythmic metronome. There is no room for the frantic beat of guilt. I am here to perform a surgery. I am here to excise the last thread of a narrative I spent years weaving. They say character is what you do when no one is looking, but I know better. Character is what you convince the world you are when the cameras are on. I must be the saint he doesn't deserve. The hallway of the Gray Street Recovery Center smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies. Elena moved through the dim corridor, her heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the linoleum. Men in stained hoodies watched her pass, their eyes hollow. She didn't look back. She didn't belong here, and that was exactly the point. She reached room 212. The door was slightly ajar, whining on a rusted hinge. Inside, the space was barely larger than a walk-in closet. A single window looked out onto a brick wall. On the narrow cot lay a man who looked like a shadow cast by someone else. Marcus Thorne's skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. A plastic oxygen concentrator hummed in the corner, a mechanical lung keeping him tethered to a world that had forgotten him. Elena stood in the doorway for a full minute, watching his chest rise and fall in shallow, ragged hitches. He looked so fragile that a strong word might shatter him. This was the man who had been her blunt force instrument. Marcus, she said, her voice a soft, melodic intrusion. Marcus turned his head slowly. His eyes were milky, struggling to focus. When they finally landed on Elena, a flash of pure, primal terror crossed his face. He tried to sit up, his hand clawing at the thin sheets, but a fit of coughing racked his body, doubling him over. "Easy," Elena said, stepping forward. She reached out, her gloved hand hovering just inches from his shoulder. She didn't touch him. She wasn't ready for the physical reality of his decay. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Why?" Marcus managed to wheeze out once the coughing subsided. He wiped a fleck of blood from his lip with the back of a trembling hand. "Why are you here? To gloat? You lost everything because of me." "I lost a life that was built on a lie," Elena said, her voice thick with rehearsed empathy. She sat on the edge of a plastic chair, leaning in. I hated you for a long time, Marcus. I sat in my empty house and cursed your name, but then I heard you were sick. I heard the system chewed you up and spat you out for doing what you thought was right. I can see the gears turning in his head, the desperate need to believe he isn't alone. Marcus shook his head, a tear tracking through the deep lines on his face. I thought I was helping you. The files? I thought if you saw what he was doing, you could protect yourself. I didn't think it would destroy you too. Elena bowed her head, hiding the flash of steel in her eyes. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that you shouldn't die in a place that smells like a gutter. You did what you did out of a sense of justice. It was misguided, but it was brave. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Not a dossier of crimes this time, but a set of medical transfer papers. I have a guest house on my property. It's quiet. There are trees. I've hired a private nurse to provide 24-hour palliative care. I want you to spend your remaining time there. Marcus stared at her, his mouth agape. You're forgiving me? After I ruined your marriage? After the scandal? Forgiveness isn't for the weak, Marcus, she said, quoting a line she spent the morning perfecting. It's the only way I can move forward. Let me help you. As Elena helped a social worker wheel Marcus out of the facility, a flash went off from across the street. A freelance photographer, tipped off by an anonymous source 3 hours earlier, captured the moment. The framing was perfect. The fallen socialite, dressed in somber charcoal, leaning down to adjust a blanket over the legs of the man who had supposedly destroyed her life. By the time they reached her car, the image was already being uploaded. The narrative was shifting. Elena wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a martyr. She was the woman who had climbed out of the wreckage of her life to offer a hand to her enemy. The drive to the estate was silent. Marcus stared out the window at the passing trees, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. Elena watched him in the rearview mirror. He was a dying man, but more importantly, he was a silent man. As long as he was under her roof, she controlled the information. She controlled his visitors. She controlled his end. It's beautiful, Marcus whispered as they pulled to the iron gates of her secluded property. It's peace, Elena replied. The guest house was a masterpiece of clinical comfort. It was white, airy, and smelled of lavender and expensive linen. The nurse, a stoic woman named Sarah whom Elena had vetted for her discretion, was already waiting. They moved Marcus into the bed, hooking him up to the new equipment. Elena stood at the foot of the bed, watching the nurse work. She felt a cold sense of completion. The wolf was in the pen. "Do you need anything else, Marcus?" she asked. He looked up at her, his eyes brimming with a confused, pathetic kind of love. "I don't know why you're doing this. I don't deserve it." Elena smiled. It was a small, tight movement of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned over and patted his hand, finally making physical contact. His skin was cold like damp clay. "Rest now. You've done enough work for one lifetime." She walked out of the guest house and locked the door behind her, the heavy deadbolt clicking into place with finality that echoed through the garden. She looked up at the stars, the crisp night air filling her lungs. The plan was back on track. The last witness was dying in a bed she had bought for him, and the world was applauding her for it. "Sleep well, Marcus. I'll be right here until the very end." The silence of this house is a living thing. It has a weight that presses against my eardrums until I can hear the rush of my own blood. I spent years perfecting the art of the invisible move, the quiet manipulation that leaves no fingerprints. But now, the world is watching me through a magnifying glass of my own making. Every act of kindness is a thread in a noose I am tying. I can feel Marcus's presence in the guest house like a slow-moving virus. He is a repository of my darkest secret, and every breath he takes is a risk I shouldn't have to manage. I am the architect of this cage, but sometimes I can't tell which side of the bars I'm on. The sun rose over the estate, casting long, skeletal shadows across the manicured lawn. Elena moved through her morning routine with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. Yoga at 6 a.m., a protein shake at 7 a.m., and the first mercy check at 7:30 a.m. She carried a tray with a single porcelain cup of tea toward the guest house. Inside, The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and fading life. Sarah, the nurse, was recording vitals in a digital log. She looked up and gave Elena a professional, slightly sympathetic nod. "He had a rough night, Mrs. Sterling. The congestion is worsening. I've increased the morphine drip slightly." Elena approached the bed. Marcus was awake, his eyes darting toward her like a trapped animal's. He looked even smaller in the daylight, his skin translucent enough to see the blue spiderweb of veins beneath. He reached for the tea, his fingers trembling so violently that Elena had to hold the cup for him. "Thank you," he rasped. Each word sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass. "I had dreams about the office, the servers. I keep seeing the files. Elena, the names, the numbers." Elena's grip on the saucer tightened. "Those are just ghosts, Marcus. The files are gone. Focus on the tea." The sound of a car engine crunching on the gravel driveway broke the morning stillness. Elena stepped out of the guest house to find a sleek, black SUV idling in front of the main house. A man stepped out, straightening his suit jacket. It was Benjamin Vance, Julian's former law partner, and a man who knew exactly how many bodies were buried in the firm's foundation. "Elena," Ben said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. He looked toward the guest house with a mixture of disgust and curiosity. "I saw the news. I thought it was a PR stunt. But you actually brought the rat into your home. It's a bit macabre, don't you think?" Elena walked toward him, her expression a mask of cool indifference. "It's called closure, Ben. Something you and Julian clearly don't understand. Why are you here?" Ben leaned against his car, lowering his voice. "The feds are sniffing around the secondary accounts again, the ones that didn't get frozen. They think there's a silent partner who helped Julian hide the offshore growth. I came to make sure you're staying consistent. I am a victim of Julian's fraud, Ben." "Nothing more," she replied. "Right." Ben smirked. "Just be careful. That dying man," and there was an IT genius. "If he starts talking in his sleep, make sure no one is listening." After Ben left, Elena retreated to her private study. She locked the door and pulled a hidden laptop from a floor safe. Her heart rate spiked, a rare lapse in her composure. She had been monitoring the dead man switch she had set up years ago, a digital protocol that would wipe the offshore accounts if her biometric signature wasn't refreshed every 30 days. She saw a red notification. An unauthorized IP address had attempted to ping the server she used as a relay. It was a sophisticated probe, one that bypassed standard firewalls. It originated from a local library, the same library Marcus used a frequent before his arrest. My pulse is a hammer against my ribs. Someone is looking for the source of the leak, and they aren't using legal channels. Could Marcus have told someone? Could he have left a trail she missed? She went back through the logs, her eyes scanning thousands of lines of code. The probe had been looking for a specific timestamp, the exact moment the whistleblower dossier was first compiled. Not when it was sent, but when it was created. If they found that, they'd find her digital fingerprint. The afternoon rain began to fall, a steady gray curtain. Elena returned to the guest house, her mind racing. She found Marcus agitated, his oxygen mask discarded on the floor. He was clutching an old leather-bound notebook. "I need to tell you." Marcus grabbed her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by the frantic energy of a man who knew time was a finite resource. "The person who sent me the files. The source. I think they're still out there. Elena, I got a message on an old board last week, before you found me." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "What message, Marcus?" "They asked if I was happy with the outcome," he whispered. "They know I'm here. They know you took me in. They called it the perfect irony. I'm scared, Elena. I think they're going to kill me to finish the story." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't just a pawn anymore. He was a liability that was starting to think. He was terrified of a phantom she had created. But the probe on her laptop suggested that the phantom might have taken on a life of its own. "No one is going to hurt you," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I've turned this place into a fortress. You're safe with me. I am the one he should be afraid of, yet he clings to me like a lifeline. It's sickening. That evening, Elena stood on her balcony, looking down at the guest house. The lights were low. Sarah was moving shadows against the curtains. Elena pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "I need a sweep of the perimeter," she said when the line connected. "And I need the guest house bugged. Every word, every breath, every groan. If he speaks to anyone, nurse, delivery man, or God himself, I want to hear it." She hung up and stared into the dark. She had spent 5 years waiting for Marcus to die, so she could finally breathe. Now, she was keeping him alive just to make sure he didn't take her down with him. The saintly widow was becoming a jailer, and the line between protection and imprisonment was disappearing. She watched a single car drive slowly past her gates, its headlights off. It didn't stop, but it didn't speed up either. The hunter was being hunted, and the prey was tucked safely in her spare bedroom. "I built this tomb for him, but I'm the one who can't leave. The air in my study is stagnant, recycled, and cold. My skin feels too tight for my bones, a physical manifestation of the paranoia crawling up my spine. I built a life on a foundation of control variables. But Marcus Thorne is a leak I can't plug. Every time he coughs, I wonder if it's his lungs failing or the truth try to claw its way out. The world sees a woman of grace. I see a woman standing on a trapdoor, waiting for the rope to snap. I am not a caregiver. I am a containment unit. And the containment is failing." The silent alarm on Elena's phone vibrated against her thigh at 2 a.m. She was out of bed before her eyes were fully open, her hand instinctively reaching for the heavy mag light she kept on the nightstand. The security feed on her tablet showed a breach at the north fence, not a person but a drone. It was hovering just inches from the guest house window, its red status light blinking like a malevolent eye. She ran toward the garden, the damp grass soaking her silk hem. By the time she reached the guest house, the drone was gone, a fading were in the dark sky. She burst through the door, finding Sarah the nurse slumped in the armchair, deep in a chemically induced sleep. On the bedside table, next to Marcus's morphine pump, sat a small, black envelope that hadn't been there an hour ago. Elena's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. She picked up the envelope with her sleeve. Inside was a single Polaroid of her own house, taken from the woods, with a message scrawled in red ink. "The savior is the snake." Elena didn't wake the nurse. She went straight to Marcus, who was drifting in a feverish haze. She shook his shoulder, harder than a saint ever should. He gasped, his eyes flying open, fixed with the terror of a man seeing a ghost. The message on the boards, "Marcus, tell me exactly what it said," she hissed, her face inches from his. The mask of the grieving widow had slipped, revealing the jagged edge of the predator beneath. They said they were the real whistleblower," Marcus stammered, his voice a pathetic rattle. "They said I was just a delivery boy. They said they were coming to collect the debt." "What debt? Who are they?" "I don't know. I swear." Marcus began to weep, a thin, weak sound that grated on Elena's nerves. "They sent me the files back then to destroy Julian, but they said you were the one who profited. They said you won. They don't want Julian anymore. Elena! They want you." The next afternoon, Elena stood in front of a bank of microphones on her front lawn. The press had gathered for a scheduled update on Marcus's condition. A move her PR team insisted would solidify her public redemption. She looked perfect in a navy sheath dress, but her hands were tucked behind her back to hide the tremor. "Mr. Thorne is comfortable," she told the cameras, her voice steady and warm. "We are focusing on dignity and peace in these final weeks. It is my hope that this act of reconciliation serves as a reminder that even in the wake of ruin, there is room for grace." As she spoke, she spotted a reporter from an independent investigative blog, someone who had been digging into the missing offshore accounts for months. He wasn't taking notes. He was staring at the guest house with a look of intense calculation. Elena realized then that the drone hadn't just been a threat. It had been a scout. The Saint Elena narrative was being picked apart by people who didn't believe in miracles. Back inside the guest house, the atmosphere had shifted. Sarah, the nurse, was no longer looking at Elena with professional admiration. She was hovering over Marcus's chart, her brow furrowed. "Mrs. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice cautious, "I found this under Mr. Thorne's pillow." It's a burner phone. He says he didn't put it there. He claims a friend brought it while I was asleep last night. Elena took the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. I'll handle this, Sarah. Marcus is confused. The medication causes hallucinations. He didn't seem confused when he told me he was afraid of you, Sarah countered, her spine stiffening. He said he thinks you're keeping him here to watch him die, not to help him. I'm required by law to report any concerns of patient intimidation. Elena's eyes turned into chips of ice. You are paid to provide care, Sarah, not to listen to the ramblings of a man with a brain ravaged by hypoxia. If you value your license, you will remember who signed your paycheck. That night, Elena sat in the guest house after Sarah's shift ended, watching Marcus sleep. The burner phone sat on her lap. It vibrated once. A text message appeared. Tell her the truth, Marcus, or I will. She looked at the man in the bed. He was the only thing standing between her and a life of permanent, wealthy anonymity. If he talked to the nurse or the reporter or the real whistleblower on the phone, the dossier she had used to frame him would become her own death warrant. She had spent 5 years waiting for nature to take its course, but nature was moving too slowly. She looked at the morphine drip, a small adjustment, a slight increase in the dosage, and Marcus would simply stop breathing. It would be seen as a natural progression of his illness. The saint would be seen as a woman who sat by his side until the very end. She reached the dial, her fingers cold and certain. She wasn't a murderer. She was a cleaner. She was protecting the empire she had stolen from the wreckage. I gave you a beautiful place to die, Marcus. Don't make me ruin it. The plastic of the dial is cool against my skin, a small, circular gateway between silence and scandal. I can hear the liquid clicking through the tube, a countdown that only I can hear. My pulse is a steady, clinical thrum. No panic, just the cold math of survival. They say the first time you consider taking a life, your soul recoils. Mine isn't recoiling. It's calculating the overhead. Marcus is a vessel that has outlived its utility, a leaking container of my own history. If I turn this dial, the leak stops. If I don't, the floor collapses beneath us both. I am not a killer. I am a closing argument. Elena's thumb brushed the edge of the plastic dial. Marcus groaned in his sleep, his head lolling toward her. In the dim light of the guest house, he looked like a wax figure melting under a hot lamp. His lips moved, whispering a name, not hers, but a name she hadn't heard in years. Clara, he wheezed. Elena froze. Clara was Marcus's sister, the one who had died while he was in prison because he couldn't afford her treatment after his assets were seized. A sudden, sharp memory of the day she picked Marcus out of the IT directory flashed in her mind. She had chosen him because he was desperate, because he had a sister to save. She had used his love as his leash. She pulled her hand back as if the machine had burned her. It wasn't out of pity, but out of a sudden, sharp realization. If Marcus died tonight, right after a drone breach and a burner phone appearance, it would look like a desperate cover-up. She needed him alive just long enough to identify the person sending the messages. I need him to be my shield one last time. Elena returned to the main house, her footsteps heavy on the hardwood. She bypassed her bedroom and went straight to the basement, where a second, more powerful server was hidden behind a false wall of vintage wine. She sat in the dark, the blue light of 3 monitors illuminating her face. She began tracing the burner phone signal. It wasn't coming from a distant city or a proxy server. It was bouncing off a local tower less than 2 miles away. She pulled up the estate's external perimeter cameras from the last 48 hours and ran a facial recognition sweep against the unidentified visitors. A hit popped up. A woman in her late 30s, wearing a nondescript gray parka, had been sitting in a parked car at the edge of the woods for 3 hours. The software analyzed the bone structure and matched it against a public database. Cassandra Thorne. Elena whispered to the empty room. The sister wasn't dead. The records she had seen 5 years ago were faked, or she had been lied to. Marcus's motivation hadn't been corporate ethics. It had been a sister who was now back in the shadows to reclaim the life Elena had stolen from them both. Elena didn't call the police. She grabbed a small, snub-nosed revolver from her safe, tucked it into the small of her back, and walked into the woods bordering her property. The air was damp with the scent of pine and rotting leaves. She found the gray car parked in a gravel turnout. The window rolled down. Cassandra Thorne didn't look like a victim. She looked like a hunter. Her eyes were hard, reflecting the moon like chips of obsidian. "You're late, Elena," Cassandra said, her voice a low, raspy vibrato. "I figured you'd have found me by yesterday. You were always the smartest person in the firm." "How are you alive?" Elena asked, keeping her hand near her coat pocket. "I wasn't the one who was sick. It was a play. Marcus and I knew someone was setting him up back then, but we didn't know it was the boss's wife until he saw the whistleblower files in court. He recognized your syntax. Elena, you're a brilliant lawyer, but you have a very specific way of footnoting corruption." Cassandra stepped out of the car. She was holding a tablet. "I don't want the police, and I don't want justice. Justice doesn't pay for the 5 years my brother spent in a cage or the lungs he lost to the black mold in that prison." "What do you want?" Elena asked, her voice a cold wire. "The offshore accounts," Cassandra replied. "The ones Marcus helped Julian set up, and the ones you moved the second Julian was in cuffs. I know the balance. Elena, it's $84 million. I want half. You transfer it to a private wallet tonight, or the original unedited dossier, the one with your digital signature all over it, goes to the FBI and the New York Times at dawn." Elena felt a cold sweat prickle her hairline. This wasn't a real whistleblower on a moral crusade. This was a shakedown. "Marcus is dying, Cassandra. He doesn't have weeks. He has days. You're using his deathbed to buy a yacht." "I'm using his deathbed to pay for the life you took from us," Cassandra snapped. "You have 4 hours." Elena walked back to the house, the gun heavy against her spine. She checked the guest house through the window. Marcus was awake, staring at the ceiling, his chest heaving. He was a pawn who had been played by both his sister and his benefactor. She sat at her desk, the transfer screen open. $42 million. It was the price of her freedom. But she knew people like Cassandra. Once the money was sent, the leverage didn't disappear. It just got more expensive. Cassandra wouldn't stop until Elena was bled dry or in a cell next to Julian. She looked at the security feed of the guest house. Marcus was reaching for the call button for the nurse. Elena picked up her phone and blocked the signal. She didn't start the transfer. Instead, she began drafting a new file. If she couldn't buy silence, she would have to manufacture a different kind of noise. She needed a tragedy that would erase both Thorne's siblings in one clean stroke, leaving her as the only survivor of a tragic murder-suicide driven by Marcus's guilt. "I didn't build this empire to share it with a ghost." The taste of iron is back in my mouth, the sharp tang of a cornered animal. I've spent my life playing a game of chess where I move both the black and white pieces. But Cassandra Thorne just flipped the board. She thinks she has me trapped in a binary choice, poverty or prison. She doesn't realize that I don't believe in losing. I am the woman who dismantled the Titan. I will not be bled dry by a scavenger in a gray parka. My morality isn't a compass. It's a tool. And right now, the only tool that works is one that leaves no witnesses. I am going to burn this bridge while they are both standing on it. Elena stood in the kitchen, her movements fluid and devoid of the tremors she felt inside. She poured a glass of wine, her eyes fixed on the clock. 11:15 p.m. She had less than 3 hours before Cassandra's deadline. She took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the tannins dry out her mouth. She opened the drawer beneath the silver set and pulled out a small, unassuming vial of liquid, succinylcholine. It was a paralytic she had acquired months ago from a client who dealt in the darker side of pharmaceutical litigation. It was tasteless, odorless, and in a man like Marcus, it would look like a sudden, massive respiratory failure brought on by his terminal condition. She didn't feel the weight of the vial. She only felt the necessity of it. If Marcus died now, Cassandra's leverage changed. A dead man can't testify, and a distraught sister who breaks onto property of a grieving widow looks like a criminal, not a whistleblower. The math is simple. One life for the rest of mine. A soft thud against the side of the house signaled Cassandra's arrival. She wasn't waiting for the transfer. She was checking the perimeter. Elena watched the security monitor as Cassandra moved with practiced stealth toward the guest house. She wasn't just a sister. She was a liability who knew how to bypass the infrared sensors. Elena intercepted her at the guest house door. The two women stood in the shadows, the silence between them taut enough to snap. "The money is being batched," Elena lied, her voice a calm, professional whisper. "But I need you to see him first. He's agitated. He's calling for you. If he dies while you're out here playing mercenary, you'll never get the encryption keys for the second ledger." He hid them in a physical location. Cassandra's eyes flickered with greed. "Where?" "They'll only tell you," Elena said, stepping aside. "Go in. I've sent the nurse away for an hour to gather supplies. You have 10 minutes before she returns." The interior of the guest house felt like a tomb. Marcus was awake, his eyes wide and glazed with the sheen of imminent death. When Cassandra rushed to his side, his hand flew up, clutching her sleeve. "Cassie," he croaked, the sound wet and terrible. "I'm here, Marcus. We're going to get the money. We're going to go to the coast," she promised, her voice breaking. For a moment, the hunter disappeared, replaced by a grieving sibling. Elena stood by the door, the vial hidden in her palm. She watched them, a portrait of tragic loyalty. It was almost beautiful, in a grotesque sort of way. They were two people who had been ruined by the world, clinging to each other in a room paved by the woman who had ruined them. "Tell her, Marcus," Cassandra urged. "Where's the physical backup? The one she can't delete?" "I'll get him a glass of water," Elena said softly, moving toward the small kitchenette. Her back was to them. She uncapped the vial and dropped 3 clear droplets into the bottom of a plastic cup, then filled it from the tap. She walked back to the bed and handed the cup to Cassandra. "He can't swallow much. Just a sip." Cassandra held the cup to her brother's lips. As Marcus drank, Elena felt a strange sense of detachment. She wasn't watching a man die. She was watching a file being deleted. A few seconds passed. Marcus's breathing didn't just slow, it flattened. His eyes rolled back, his body stiffening as the paralytic took hold, mimicking the final struggle of his cancer. "Marcus? Marcus!" Cassandra screamed, dropping the cup. It clattered on the floor, the remaining liquid soaking into the rug. "He's transitioning," Elena said, her voice a soothing clinical lie. "It's the end, Cassandra. Let him go." I can feel the air leaving the room, the finality of it settling over us like dust. Marcus Thorne took his last, rattling breath and went still. The silence that followed was deafening. Cassandra collapsed against the bed, sobbing, a raw, ugly sound that filled the sterile room. Elena didn't offer comfort. She stepped back and pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the speed dial for the police. "Now," Elena said, her voice dropping the facade of warmth. "You have a choice, Cassandra. You can stay here and be found next to your brother's body, a trespasser who broke into a private estate and caused a stress that killed a dying man. I'll tell the police you were trying to extort him. I have the security footage of you at the gate. I have the burner phone messages." Cassandra looked up, her face twisted with rage and realization. "You killed him. You did something to him." "I did what was necessary," Elena replied, her eyes as cold as the moon outside. "The money is gone. The whistleblower is dead. And you? You're just a ghost. If you leave now, you stay a ghost. If you stay, you become a prisoner. Choose quickly. I'm calling the authorities in 60 seconds. Elena watched the woman who had tried to blackmail her. She saw the moment Cassandra realized she was outmatched. The saint had won, and the only price was a man who was going to die anyway. One loose end tied. One to go. The air is cold enough to crystallize the breath in my lungs, but I feel nothing but a sharp, crystalline clarity. The sirens are a symphony I composed, a loud, distracting overture to mask the silence of the guest house. I have scrubbed the cup, replaced the vial, and arranged my face into the perfect mosaic of grief and shock. They see a woman who has reached her breaking point. I see a woman who has finally cleared the board. The only variable left is Cassandra, a shadow fleeing into the woods. And shadows don't hold up in court. I am the only witness left of the truth, which means the truth is whatever I say it is. Detective Miller. A different Miller than the firm's security head. This one, with tired eyes and a cheap suit, stood in the foyer of the main house. He held a notepad, his pen poised over the page like a vulture's beak. "Start from the beginning, Mrs. Sterling," he said. "The nurse was gone and you heard a noise?" Elena wiped a stray, calculated tear from her cheek. "I heard shouting. I ran to the guest house. I saw a woman. She was hovering over Marcus. She was screaming about money, about Julian's accounts. She looked like she was shaking him. And you recognize this woman?" I think it was his sister," Elena whispered, her voice cracking at the precise frequency of a woman in distress. "He told me she was dead, but she looked just like the photos in his file. She must have been the one sending the threats. She killed him, didn't she? The stress, his heart just couldn't take it." Miller nodded, scribbling. "We found the unauthorized drone in the bushes. Matches the description of the one you reported. It looks like a targeted extortion attempt. Elena, I'm sorry you had to witness this." The coroner's team moved the gurney out of the guest house. The wheels rattled on the gravel, a hollow, metallic sound that signaled the end of Marcus Thorne's long, miserable walk. Elena watched from the window, her hand clutching the white shawl. Inside the guest house, the forensic techs were dusting the surfaces. Elena knew they wouldn't find the succinylcholine. It was a short-acting paralytic that metabolized almost instantly in a body already failing from systemic organ failure. To them, Marcus was a terminal patient who died of respiratory arrest, a natural conclusion to a tragic story. I can see the flash of their cameras through the trees. Every bulb is a seal on my secret. "Ma'am," a younger officer approached her. "We found a burner phone in the grass near the fence. It's encrypted, but we're sending it to the lab. Did you see the suspect drop anything?" She was running so fast. Elena said she headed toward the north woods. "Please, just tell me he's at peace now." While the police combed the grounds, Elena retreated to her study under the guise of resting. She sat at her desk and opened her primary laptop. Her heart stopped. A new window was open on her desktop. It wasn't a probe or a ping. It was a video file titled Merci_Final.mp4. She clicked play. The video was a high-definition recording from a hidden camera inside the guest house, one she hadn't installed. The angle was from the ceiling fan, looking directly down at the bed. The footage showed everything. Elena dropping the liquid into the cup, Cassandra handing it to Marcus, and the chillingly calm expression on Elena's face as she watched him die. A line of text scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "The cloud is a dangerous place to keep a master file. Elena, Marcus wasn't the only IT genius at the firm. I was his mentor." "Hey!" The desk phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. Elena stared at it for 3 rings before picking up, her knuckles white. "Who is this?" she hissed. "You spent so much time looking for the source that you forgot the most basic rule of law." "Elena," a voice replied. It was Alexander, the former head of digital security at Julian's firm, a man she had helped Julian fire 6 years ago to cover their tracks. "You don't look for the leak. You look for the person who built the pipe." "What do you want, Alexander?" "Money. I don't need money. I've been living off the interest of the accounts you thought were hidden for years." He laughed, a cold, dry sound. "I wanted to see if the saint would actually kill the martyr. You didn't disappoint. The police are in your house. Elena, they're 5 rooms away. I'm uploading the guest house footage to their local server in 60 seconds. Unless what? Unless you confess to the whistleblowing 5 years ago. Tell the truth about Julian. Tell the truth about the frame-up. Give the sister the money and go to prison for fraud, not the murder. I'll delete the video of the cup. A fraud charge is 10 years. Murder is life." Elena looked at the door. She could hear Miller's voice in the hall, talking to the nurse who had just returned. The walls were closing in, the architecture of her ruin finally complete. She had 60 seconds to choose a legacy. She could be the saint who was exposed as a cold-blooded killer, or the corrupt attorney who finally found a conscience. Both paths led to the cell. Both paths ended her life as she knew it. She looked at the photo of her and Julian on the desk, a couple who thought they were gods. She picked up a heavy crystal paperweight and slammed it into the laptop screen, shattering the liquid crystal into a kaleidoscope of colors. I am not a prisoner of your choices, Alexander. I am the one who decides how this story ends. She stood up, straightened her shawl, and walked toward the door. She wasn't going to confess, and she wasn't going to run. She was going to do what she did best. She was going to litigate the impossible. "Detective Miller," she called out, her voice echoing through the house. "I need to show you something in my study. I think the sister left a digital trail on my computer. The air in this room is dying, just like Marcus. I can feel the walls contracting, the expensive wallpaper peeling back to reveal the rot underneath. Alexander thinks he has me in a pincer move, a choice between a cage and a needle. He's a technician, a man of logic and code, and he's made the classic mistake of thinking I'm governed by the same rules. He doesn't understand that a queen doesn't trade herself for a pawn. She burns the entire board so no one can claim the win. My life was over the moment I let Marcus into this house. Everything since then has been a dress rehearsal for the exit. I am the only one who gets to write the final sentence." Detective Miller entered the study, his eyes scanning the wreckage of the laptop. He looked from the shattered screen to the crystal paperweight in Elena's hand. The air in the room shifted, the professional sympathy in his gaze curdling into a sharp, jagged suspicion. "I heard a crash, Mrs. Sterling," Miller said, his hand resting instinctively on the grip of his sidearm. "What happened to computer?" "I saw it," Elena whispered, her voice a hollow shell. She pointed a trembling finger at the dark, cracked monitor. A video, a message from the person who was harassing Marcus. They were mocking me, detective. They said they killed him to get to me. I panicked. I just wanted the face to go away. Miller stepped closer, inspecting the damage. "You destroyed evidence in a homicide investigation, Elena. That's a felony." "I was protecting my soul," she snapped, a flash of her old courtroom fire sparking in her eyes. "You have no idea what it's like to be hunted by ghosts. Take the hard drive. Take everything. Just find the person who did this to him." The police moved through the house with a new, aggressive energy. The saint was now a suspect, and the transition was seamless. Elena sat in the kitchen, watching the forensics team bag her broken laptop. She knew Alexander's 60 seconds had passed. If the upload was happening, the servers at the precinct were already receiving the footage of the morphine drip. She looked out at the guest house. The lights were off now, the stage empty. She felt a strange, cold peace. She had spent 5 years playing a role, maintaining a lie that had become her entire reality. Now, the truth was a freight train coming for her, and she found herself standing on the tracks, arms wide open. "We're going to need you to come down to the station, Mrs. Sterling," Miller said, appearing in the doorway. He wasn't asking. "We've received an external data dump. You're going to want to see it with a lawyer present." "I am a lawyer, detective," she said, standing up with a grace that silenced the room. "I've always been my own best counsel." The ride to the precinct was a blur of rain and neon. Elena sat in the back of the cruiser, the cold glass of the window pressed against her forehead. She watched the city flicker by, the skyscrapers she had conquered, the courtroom she had dominated. It was all a set, a collection of painted cardboard and bright lights. She thought about Marcus. He was the only person who had ever truly known her, even if he didn't realize it. He was her creation, her masterpiece of misery. She had cared for him in the end, not out of love, but out of the obsessive attention an artist pays to their final work. The cruiser pulled into the underground garage. The heavy iron gate hissed shut behind them. The trap had closed. The room was small, gray, and smelled of stale coffee. Miller sat across from her, a laptop open between them. He turned the screen around. It wasn't a video of the guest house. It was a document, a digital confession, signed by Alexander, detailing his role in the original firm's collapse. "Alexander took his own life 10 minutes ago," Miller said, his voice flat. "But he left a trail. He admitted to the hack, the extortion, and the drone. He said he was the one who sent Marcus the files 5 years ago. He said he did it to destroy your husband." Elena blinked. "The video? The morphine?" "He also mentioned a video," Miller continued, leaning in. but the file was corrupted during the upload. All we have is a black screen and your voice saying, "Rest now." It looks like you were comforting a dying man, just like you said. Elena felt a surge of adrenaline, so sharp it was painful. Alexander hadn't sent the footage. He had bluffed. He had used his final moments to clear the board, taking the fall for the original sin to protect the only person he actually respected, the woman who was smarter than all of them. 3 days later, the charges were dropped. The saint had been vindicated, her reputation bolstered by the tragic suicide of her stalker. Elena stood in the cemetery, the only person present for Marcus's burial. The rain was a light mist, cooling the heat of her victory. She stood at the edge of the open grave. The casket was simple, unadorned. She leaned down, as if to toss a handful of dirt, but instead, she whispered into the hollow silence of the earth. "You were right, Marcus," she breathed, her voice a ghost of a sound. "The source was always out there. But you were wrong about the motive. I didn't frame you to destroy Julian. I framed you because I knew you were the only one who would actually believe I was a victim. I didn't bring you home to forgive you. I brought you home to watch the last witness die." She stood up, adjusted her veil, and walked away. She had lost her husband, her firm, and her soul. But as she stepped into her waiting car, she checked the balance of the offshore accounts on her phone. $84 million. She wasn't a widow. She wasn't a saint. She was a survivor. And as the car pulled away from the graveyard, she realized the most terrifying truth of all. She had finally achieved the perfect silence she had always craved.